Oh, wow, it's another day. I'm Charlie Sykes. Welcome to the Contrary podcast. And on these days when you go, wow, what a day, I always want to talk to my good friend Adam Kinzinger. How are you, sir?
Buddy, it is great to be with you. Just wonderful. Yeah, I'm great. I'm fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry to start every podcast the same way, but where should we begin here? Can we just talk about the fact that the president of the United States is demanding the taxpayers write out a check for $230 million? I mean, it's like, have we gotten so numbed about just the open corruption, the president saying, and it will have to be approved by his own lackeys who will have to decide, yes, Mr. President, we're going to give you $230 million as compensation for all the terrible things the Department of Justice did to you.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
He's going to get the money,
today,
right?
I think so. I mean, unless he he decides no, because he's made enough on his other corruption. But Speaker Johnson today was basically like, I forget what he said, but he had some outrageous comment about it, and how he's been mistreated, and the Republicans won't. I mean, they're not going to do anything to stop this. It. Even our so-called, the two people that put out tweets every now and again that are good, Don Bacon and some others, they're not going to do anything to stop it. And I mean, it's and let's think about this on top of it's not that there was no independent finding that Donald Trump was wronged, right? Donald Trump's prosecution was on track. Right. Then he became president and forced the Department of Justice to drop the case. So it wasn't dropped because, there was some finding that he was wronged. So he basically is creating his own scenario. I mean, look, if you're president of the United States from here forward, you may as well sue yourself and then find in your favor.
Pay yourself. That's right.
Pay yourself. And this is, by the way, Charlie, this is what happens in Latin American countries. It's this, Are
they that blatant, though? I mean, I would think the banana republics are blushing about this. Like, come on. I mean, it's just like it's out in the open. Give me the $230 million. Okay, so you mentioned Mike Johnson. And, of course, Socrates' famous question comes to mind when we ask about Mike Johnson. What the fuck is with that guy? I mean, seriously. I mean, I know he's got a lot of time on his hands since he doesn't actually have a House of Representatives that's been doing anything for months. But in the last 7 days, comes out and says, yes, these No Kings rallies are hate America rallies. Who's going to show up? These extremists, Hamas supporting Antifa folks. And what happens? Grandmas come out, people dressed as Tyrannosaurus Rex and unicorns. And then he turns around. And he is about the only, well, he's not the only man in America, but it's like you're wondering who's going to come up with the lamest justification for Donald Trump's AI video of himself in the jet taking a big shit upon fellow Americans. And there's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, going, it is satire.
Yeah.
Yes, because, it's exactly the kind of thing you'd find in the Old Testament or when I read Shakespeare. When the successor to Abraham Lincoln says, let us take a dump upon our fellow Americans. So, I mean, what is with Mike Johnson? Give me
I don't know.
Help me here.
Well, the amazing thing about it, too, is, I've been saying this more and more, which is like the founding fathers always envisioned a guy like Trump. That's not a surprise to them. But they never envisioned a Congress that would so willingly kind of flip and roll over. And so here's Speaker Johnson. I mean, the only thing I can figure. So first off, I will say I have no idea how you can call yourself a Christian and do the kind of things he does, which is first and foremost, regardless of the policy, he's blatantly lying, and he knows he's lying, right? Every time he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know this story. It's a lie. And, the only thing I can figure, Charlie, if he truly does take his faith seriously and think, is that he has somehow convinced himself that Donald Trump, like so many in the evangelical movement have convinced themselves that Donald Trump is literally a God-sent character and necessary for our time. And Mike Johnson is simply playing his role as Moses, leading the Republican Party in America.
I think you're giving him way too much credit here. I don't know.
Yeah,
the George Santos story. Segueing onto that, you take probably one of the most the feculent crooks of our lifetimes, as a serial liar, a guy who's a punchline, and the president of the United States goes, who I'm going to use my constitutionally granted powers of pardon and commutation. I'm going to let George Santos out. I guess part of it is that all of these guys, every time there's an outrage, they feel they have to cling more tightly to the Orange God King's robes, because that gives them immunity, freedom from accountability. And if they let loose, if they break, if they say, you know, I disagree or I disapprove of that, you know, they might find themselves in the category of James Comey, Miles Taylor, John Bolton. And so the more outrageous he becomes, the more willing he is to abuse his pardon power. It feels as and the retaliation that there's less and less dissent. There's less and less. I mean, when you were there, it was hard to get Republicans to say anything negative. Now it feels like it doesn't matter what story. It doesn't matter whether he's shitifying the White House, taking a dump on Americans, grifting $230 million. No one's going to say anything or do anything, are they?
No, I mean, look, if you think back to the first term, you remember it was controversial when he said, deport, the two congresswomen or whatever.
Oh, yeah, right.
Rashida Tlaib. And in fact, there were like 50 Republicans. Yeah, there were like 50 Republicans that were going to vote to condemn him. And, and that was pretty mild compared to what he's doing today. There used to actually be an opposition, but you don't see that anymore. And I think, Charlie, to your point about, clinging tighter to him, I'm going to only use this example because it's powerful in history, and I'm not comparing the Republican Party to that. But if you think back to Nazi Germany, right? Every time somebody committed an act on behalf of the Nazi Party that, whether it was murder, whether it was genocide, whatever it was, you would end up becoming a more fervent supporter. Because as the human condition, you have to convince yourself that what you're doing is moral. And humans are amazingly capable of convincing themselves that anything they do is moral. But secondarily, that now you have to win. Because if, in fact, you ever lose, you'll be held accountable to that. And so whether consciously or subconsciously, these members of Congress now are saying, look, we have got to double down on Trump. This is why, let's use illiberal ways to stay in power, because if the Democrats ever win, we're in trouble. And I think there is a conscious and subconscious element of that in some of this action.
Oh, we can come back. We can come back to that. I was actually thinking of the analogy of being in a mob, being a made man. It's one of the reasons why, if you're part of a gang, you're part of organized crime, go out there, commit a crime, do something for, the Godfather, and then they own you because, you now are complicit. You are guilty with them. And I think that's part of it. I do wonder their recklessness is so extreme now. The graft is so open that you do wonder, would you behave this way if you ever thought there was a possibility that the other side would have these levers of power? This is why people don't abuse power, because you think if I use that, it might be used against me. So these guys are acting as if there's never going to be a Democratic attorney general. There's never going to be a Democratic president who appoints U.S. attorneys, right? Is it because of the immunity, because of the pardon power?
Or do
they think they're never going to give up power?
I think it's a little of both. I also think that, again, so now you're talking, the Tom Holman types, right? That take 50,000 in a paper bag. I think their hope is that Donald Trump protects them. The members of Congress their hope is that they never lose power. And if they do lose power, that as long as the 35 to 40% of Americans that they're comfortable in, the Fox News watchers continue to support them, that's a comfortable enough bubble for them. That's a power bubble. And I also think it's just after 10 years, this is the thing, is Donald Trump's been in our life for 10 years now, which is crazy to think about. Yeah,
it is. You're telling me.
And after 10 years, the people that were willing to put up a fight, or that weren't willing to put up a fight but also weren't willing to stay, have all been washed out. And so now you've been replaced by either true believers or replaced by people that literally were only there because they love the title and they'll do anything to keep it. So any semblance of any Republican that ever got elected with some truly, I want to go do good in their heart, they're gone. They're not there anymore. And that's a fact.
Yeah. And he's also surrounded himself with people, and you and I have talked about this before, people who have really owe all of their power and their celebrity to him. They're not people who are, at least in Trump 1.0, there were some significantly substantive people there. There had been people who had been CEOs of major corporations or had been generals who had lives, who were people of accomplishment. He's dragging people out of, frankly, I mean, what drunk tank did he pull Pete Hegseth out of? And where does Pete Hegseth go if it's not for Trump? By the way, speaking of Pete Hegseth.
By the way, can I make a point on that though, real quick?
Yeah,
it's just because that culture is important. I remember in the first Trump administration when you went to the Trump Hotel, it was filled with, I don't know if you ever went, but it's filled with like Mar-a-Lago face people. Yeah. It's filled with all the Fox News personalities, and it's a place where no matter where you're from, if you go there, you all of a sudden are kind of either exposed to this kind of Hollywood culture that MAGA is, or you're part of it. And if you're a B-level person that's on Fox News occasionally and you go to the Trump Hotel, now that's become Mar-a-Lago. But if you go to one of those places, you walk in and you're Arnold Schwarzenegger to those people. And there is something you said about that, which is that is very addictive. And I think people need to never discount that fact.
No, people do respond to that. That's not a new phenomenon. I actually have a weird memory of that phenomenon you're talking about. John Dean, when he was counsel to Richard Nixon, before they got into Watergate, he actually describes a scene where he is this young White House counsel, and he's on, I don't know if he's on a commercial plane or a military plane, but when the plane lands, people come on in uniform and they say, Mr. Dean, gets off the plane first. And he describes just the ego boost that was to be in that, surrounded by that. And that is a very, very powerful drug. Okay, so let's talk about our good friend Pete Hegseth. There's a lot to be said about him, but this I thought was rather extraordinary. This story that I'm holding here, he lost us. General senior officers say trust in Hegseth has evaporated. Secretary's critics worry Pentagon at risk of enduring damage amid firings, resignations, and early retirements of high-ranking staff. Okay, same old, same old. The Washington Times. This is not the Washington Post. This is the Washington Times. This is a right-wing conservative newspaper. And this account, one devastating quote after another. Let me just read this to you. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has lost the trust and respect of some top military commanders, with his public grandstanding widely seen as unprofessional and the personnel moves made by the former cable TV host, leading to an unprecedented and dangerous exodus of talent from the Pentagon, blah, blah, blah. Numerous high-ranking officers painted Hegseth's September 30th speech to hundreds of generals and admirals gathered in Quantico as a turning point in how his leadership style, attitude, and overall competency are viewed at the upper echelons of the U.S. Armed Forces. It was a massive waste of time. If he ever had us, he lost us, one current Army general told the Washington Times. Okay, it's one thing for you and I to say stuff like that, or the New York Times, right? Or the MSNBC, CNN, Access. This is the Washington fucking Times. How bad does it have to be for them to publish something that scathing?
Incredibly bad. Not just for the Washington Times, but it's got to be incredibly bad for generals to speak, even if it's off the record or on background.
Right.
Because there's a real risk. I mean, Hegseth has created this paranoid culture in the Pentagon where, they're putting people on lie detector tests. So if you do that, if you're a general and you're willing to go on background, you're basically... you're taking a real risk there, but it's like you're this kind of cry for help to the American people. Yeah. And I think also a little bit of it is maybe a message to our adversaries that they still, maybe the generals still have some control but listen, with Hegseth, I knew somebody that worked for him kind of early on when he was defense secretary and said he was, and confirmed he was absolutely paranoid. He particularly became paranoid after the Signalgate stuff. And he turned into basically a performance artist. So, okay, let's first talk about his speech. Now, I'll say this as a guy that served in the military for 22 years. We always knew that if we had a commander that came in and the first thing that commander talked about was uniforms and grooming standards, that commander was in over their head. Now, the reason we do that is because, look, when You know, have you ever been like overwhelmed with tasks? And so sometimes you just go do a very simple task because you just feel overwhelmed, right? Maybe you pay your bills or something like that.
Yes.
That's what happens with command. Yeah, I do too, man. I was like,
every day.
Oh, I can only go running so many times. But he basically, when a commander comes in, and this includes Hegseth, and starts focusing on uniforms and saying the so trite thing we've heard 100 times in the military, which is if we can't trust you to keep your uniform right, how can we trust you to operate a plane? Well, actually very well, because I hate keeping my uniform straight and I love operating planes. But it shows a commander that doesn't have control, and so he reverts to the thing he can control. He can control if troops are fat. He can control if troops wear beards. He can control if troops are wearing the right patches. And that's what you saw. And every general in that room knows that, by the way. They're well aware of that. So the other thing is, how many times does Pete Hegseth have to, quote unquote, work out with the troops, right? Doesn't he have something to do? Just the other day, a couple days ago, he got a video in a fighter jet. I want to talk about this.
Yeah, I want to hear about the jet.
So he put out the Department of War and Hegseth and everybody put out this video where he's got all his fighter pilot stuff on and he's like flying this plane. And they don't say he pilots it, but they say he's in a, F-16 or whatever. And what they do is they don't show the pilot up front. The only video is of Pete Hegseth, and it looks like he's flying the plane. And I'll tell you, I have seen so many MAGA blue check marks on Twitter that are like, oh, what a badass. I didn't know Pete Hegseth could fly an airplane. Whoa, so cool. And when you say, because I've engaged a few of them, been like, he was just a passenger. And by the way, in a fighter unit, the recruiters, sometimes, the brand new enlisteds get a ride in the back of a fighter jet. So I'm sorry, you're not a badass. You just, you went through the egress training.
Right, yeah.
And they get angry. But yeah, all he's out doing is producing content. He's not leading the military. And it's, look, I talked to a former defense secretary before that said if a defense secretary doesn't know what they're doing, the generals are fine with that because they can take over and control. But I think that's the situation we're in. The only concern, and I know I've run long on this, the only concern is when you have generals now resigning, like the guy overseeing Venezuela, resigning because they have a concern with that. And by the way, that general is taking a loss in retirement pay by resigning because he didn't have 3 years time and grade. This is a concern and a big so I think real damage is being done to the Department of Defense. And, the only question is it permanent or is it just for the next 3 years?
Yeah, it doesn't make us any safer to dismantle, all of those centuries of experience that, that you're losing when these people retire. Well, interesting that Pete Hegseth was not flying that airplane like King Trump was flying the airplane on Saturday night, to Kenny Loggins, danger zone. You saw that. I did. So apparently Donald Trump can fly without having to put the mask on so that we can actually see his face, and he's dumping loads of shit on fellow Americans, which it felt like there's been a lot of symbolism lately. Haven't you felt like it's almost been, It's like the showrunners are pushing it a little bit too hard. Like, we get it. It's like too much on the nose. Like, okay, so does Donald Trump really, really hate America? Yes. Is Donald Trump shitting on America? Yes, he is shitting on America. Is he actually Is he taking a wrecking ball to our major institutions? Yeah, let's have the as part of let's put into the narrative that he actually starts tearing down the East Wing of the White House. I mean, what the hell? Can
I tell you something, Charlie? Here's the thing: any of them had Obama done them. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine?
No, you can't actually. No.
Yeah. I mean, Joe Biden, by the way. So Hunter Biden, who we can all agree had challenges. He sat on a board of Ukraine, got $30,000 a month, obviously had it because of his last name. Meanwhile, the Trump kids are literally following Donald Trump in all his foreign policy stuff and setting up hotels and golf courses after him. But that's okay. That's fine. He's a good boy. Eric's a good boy.
Yeah.
This is what blows me away is, seeing Republicans that I know, Jim Jordan, for instance, every year of Obama's presidency that I served with Jim Jordan, he was drafting articles of impeachment for something. And now you have a guy that is taking a wrecking ball to the White House, a historic building, a historical institution that made a decision. The White House is pushing back by saying, well, Obama put in a basketball court, Nixon put in a bowling alley, Truman gutted the White House and rebuilt it. Well, he had to because it was not up to fire code. Putting a basketball court in is not the same as tearing down the east wing of the White House and putting a $200 million ballroom in on top of the Arc de Trump that Trump is talking about. I mean, the thing is for 250 years, Washington, D.C. has existed, or 200 years, whatever it is. And anytime you change the landscape of D.C., you have to understand you're changing that for hopefully 1,000 years, because hopefully this country's here in 1,000 years, which is why there's not a monument to every little thing. But Donald Trump is building monuments to himself, of which, in reality will never come down. And it's, I don't know, man. I just don't know how any of these people can look at themselves in the mirror, honestly.
So, as you were talking, I was just sort of imagining, in his final week in office, that he's going to put those big gaudy gold letters, Trump, all the way down the Washington Monument. Trump.
Yeah, he could.
And the question is, what elected Republican, this is a trick question, would object to him doing that? Okay, now I need you to explain some stuff to me. Okay. Now, if you or I owned a property that was on the historical preservation index,
right.
historically protected property, we would have to go through a whole lot of hoops. We would have to go through a lot of stuff if we wanted to do anything. You own one of those houses, you have to talk to somebody before you put in new windows, right? I mean, you can't do anything. So what is more historical than should be historically protected than the White House? Does Donald Trump really not have to talk to anyone? Congress has no role. There's no commission. There's no oversight. He just wakes up one morning and he says, take it out.
Yeah. I mean,
how does that work?
This relies on Congress, basically going and declaring their power. So if let's say the Democrats were actually in charge of Congress right now. Yeah. And Donald Trump just took a wrecking ball. They would obviously go to
people's house.
Yes, to the people's house. That's the thing. That's like, it's not Donald Trump's house. He's renting it, right?
Yeah.
And so, Congress could then go to the courts. The courts would send a court order, and then you would have to go through the process of Congress agreeing to pay for these renovations, because he can say he's raising the money privately, but there is a cost associated with everything. And you mentioned about the story. I had a buddy that lived in a apartment building in downtown Milwaukee that was one of the old breweries, and it was freezing in his apartment all the time. So that was when I was a pilot there, because you could only have single pane windows. You couldn't even put in double pane windows that looked the same because they were not historically accurate. And this dude makes a decision to tear down part of the White House. It's egregious.
No, and it is the arrogance of it. But just go back to this concept that we called it the people's house. Every president before Trump understood that this was not their house. This was not Mar-a-Lago North. This was a place that they were temporarily in residence. Now, they could make improvements, but they would have to have a due respect. And the architecture of Washington, D.C., I think, was designed to have that classical simplicity. That we didn't have the Palace of Versailles in Washington, D.C. It was really intended to be more of the classical republic. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't understand that and doesn't care about any of that. But it is interesting how sensitive he is about this particular issue, even despite the bravado that they put out that memo telling people who worked at the Treasury Department, don't take pictures of that. We don't want any pictures of that.
Yeah.
Because the Treasury Department's right next door. Now, the other thing is, and I did this in my newsletter today, I named names. Who's paying to wreck the White House? Because this gaudy $250 million ballroom that nobody really, really wants except for Donald Trump is being paid for by his grifty shakedowns, right? The corporations who are paying him tribute. Now, I'm guessing that most of them figured, hey, we're just going to buy off. This is a way to buy off Donald Trump. We'll get influence, we get protection, we get a little bit of safety. Maybe a handful of them thought they were making some great civic contribution to the betterment of Washington, D.C. Well, now their names are all attached to the enshittification of the White House. I mean, if there's one of those moments where you go, okay, where does all that energy from No Kings go? Maybe reminding some of these corporations, we know you're afraid of Donald Trump, but maybe you ought to be paying attention to your customer base, your client base, the people out there, because they actually represent a majority of the people in this country right now.
Yeah, right? after we do this, I'm going to go find where you put that down and try to expand that, put a megaphone behind it, because I think that's important. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is you've got to, I think you have to make it aware. You have to make people aware that there's a push and pull here. And, it's the same thing like with what the governor of California did with his universities. Trump threatens the universities and Newsom says, well, look, I'm going to pull your state funding if you do it. So now you actually have a decision to make. It's not that it's just you only have one choice here. Yep, it's balanced. And that's what you have to do. And, but I'll tell you, I do kind of wonder if, and I've said this 578 times, so take that into account. Okay. But I do kind of wonder if him taking a wrecking ball to the White House is not good symbolism for people to have to see that and be like, what the hell? Like, that is a guy who's a little out of control. What the hell? And there may be a group of people. I mean, just like with this, he's talked about buying Argentina beef. It may be enough people that see that are like, wow, that guy really is insane. Nah, it's not going to be 90% of MAGA. Let's be clear. But if you peel off groups of people, that's what's important. And by the way, for the pro-democracy coalition, I can't tell you, Charlie, how many times I've seen, somebody say, okay, I saw this recently. Somebody said, I'm out. You're going to buy Argentinian beef. I was a big MAGA guy. I'm out. And the comments are filled with, you son of a bitch. We told you, no, we've got to welcome people. Right. If we do want to win, you're going to have to welcome people that were MAGA supporters. I'm sorry.
You made this point, actually, sort of the reverse of it, a couple of months ago when you were on this podcast, when you said, people ought to understand that Donald Trump's superpower is his willingness to forgive and forget. That if you walked in, if you went into the Oval Office and said, I am really sorry, Mr. President, I think you are the best, they would bring you back in. So this is kind of they may humiliate you on the way, but this is they've been willing to do that. I think the resistance has to as well. So
yes.
But they've been stacking up these I don't know what do you want to call them, sort of the coins of absurdity. I mean, you have tearing down the White House the day after he metaphorically, although graphically, shits upon fellow Americans. And then when the government is shut down and inflation is surging, he bails out Argentina. And as part of that bailout, says we're going to buy Argentinian beef. And all the beef farmers in this country are saying, have you not fucked with us enough?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. And it's just like one after another. Now, look, you and I both know there's a contingent of MAGA that is just not going to budge. They will never budge. They will never move. But I don't know. I'm looking at these polls that would certainly suggest that when people say he's abusing his power as president, he's acting like a tyrant, he's acting like a dictator, you have a majority of Americans that are going, yeah, we're kind of worried about that.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I saw some polling today, which actually is like he's now losing young people again. He's losing all these different things. And it's like, we have this feeling that it's this unstoppable steam train right now. Right. I think the reality of MAGA is it's a steam train, but I think the conductor's on his last, shovel of coal to throw in there is what it feels like. And so, you've got these little groups of people. So again, beef farmers are I think probably a lot of them are driven still by culture war issues more than anything. So they're not going to budge. They're going to be pissed, but they're not going to budge. But there are some that will. And all this is compiling into, where do we actually see this come to fruition? We see this next November, right? If the Democrats win the House. And then we see it in 3 years. That's where
we'll
sometimes
we'll see it next month, too. I mean, we'll see it in
New
that's Jersey right. and Virginia. I mean, that's going to tell us something.
Yeah, it will. And hopefully those races go well, because that will be momentum or deflationary in terms of that. But yeah, I think you're 100% right. And, the other thing, this, because it's just so stupid, keep in mind the Treasury is talking about a $1 Donald Trump coin. Even though it's against the law to put living presidents on a coin, they're very serious about, for the 250th anniversary, a Donald Trump coin.
Of course they're going to do that. Going to go back to your point about the push pull. That you have to have a counterweight, and I there've been so many, I don't know, discouraging things. There've been so many capitulations. I just take a moment though to think about what happened with Disney and Jimmy Kimmel. And some people may think that this is this is trivial, or this is popular culture. I really think you need to focus on all of that. So the people who run Disney and ABC are terrified of making Donald Trump mad. They're afraid of the FCC, right? And so what do? They do what so many other institutions have done. They say, well, let's get rid of Jimmy Kimmel. We'll give you Jimmy Kimmel's head on a platter, and then you will make nice with us, right? What happens? Well, it looks now as if literally millions of people, customers, said, screw that. They canceled their Disney Plus subscriptions. They canceled their Hulu subscriptions. And really, there was economic pain there. I mean, there's a model here that in Trump's world, that opposition has become invisible and impotent. And what happened with No Kings, and I think the blowback to the Jimmy Kimmel thing was, wait, there's a real price to be paid for all of this. And have you watched Jimmy Kimmel lately? This guy,
he's been just as good and better.
He is holding nothing back. I watch this and I go, I'm trying to imagine the conversations that he had with the Disney people. That, okay, you can do this, but like, don't go too far. I mean, like, be a little bit restrained. And Jimmy Kimmel's like, I'm going to take it up to 100, and then I'm going to dial it up to 115.
He's like Trump after the first impeachment.
Yes. It is. It's like you've been shot at without effect. So I don't know if you saw when he had, he's going to RFK Jr. stuff is really something where, he's, chewing off babies' foreskins. I mean, it's like, okay, it's like, this is not the dialed down version of Jimmy Kimmel. So the pushback works. Yeah. And I think that once people remember they have that kind of a power, that's going to change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, and it's important for us to celebrate these things, because you get asked as much as I do, like, what can I do? What can I do? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's like, I guess you could tweet more. I mean, even though it doesn't make a difference. But the reality is this: the best thing you can do for your country is go to the No Kings rally. That's great, but also just don't lose hope, because every time you don't lose hope, like, that's a victory for us, because they're energized by this chaos. So if we can stay engaged, that's how you win, because we have the numbers right now. But there is a feeling, because we've never seen a president like this that just kind of bowls over norms, and we've never seen a Congress that let it happen. So it is this feeling like, I mean, honestly, it feels like Battle of the Bulge, right? I mean, my grandpa was part of that, and I'm sure that there were times during the Battle of the Bulge where he's like, the Germans are going to overrun us. Well, they didn't, and it ended up being the thing that cost them everything, and then we were able to move into Germany after that. But at the time, it certainly felt like Hitler had, mustered all his forces, and we were going to be pushed off like at Dunkirk. So I think it's an important thing to remember.
But one of my favorite stories out of the Battle of the Bulge. Remember when the German commander actually, when the American forces were surrounded at Bastogne, he sent him a message saying you should surrender. And what was the general's name? I'm
nuts.
I'm having he wrote back, and he just one word, nuts. See, that's the response, nuts. And we know how that turned out. No,
and that, by the way, rallied the American troops. That went like fire through the Allied lines, and actually rallied the troops to push back.
And I think that should be our message as well, is nuts. No, people have asked me about No Kings, and I said, look, it's obviously necessary. It's not sufficient. It doesn't move the needle necessarily. It has to lead to something. But it was really, really, really important for people to turn out. I know you agree with this. Turn out and look around and realize we're not alone.
That's right.
And I have to say, I was very impressed at how peaceful it was, how clever it was, how, in fact, what a dramatic refutation of all of the smears from Mike Johnson and from the Trump administration. I mean, there were not a lot of Palestinian flags and a lot of Mexican flags, people not behaving badly. Donald Trump, I want to say overtly or implicitly, Donald Trump wanted that to turn violent. In Donald Trump's movie version of all of this, it's all carnage, it's violence. It's why they wanted to bring in, the National Guard, and no kings didn't do it. But the real importance was to let people know that, hey, you have agency and you're not alone, and maybe look at your neighbors. And so this thing is not hopeless. I mean, isn't that and that has real value.
I think so. And I didn't go to the one here where I live in the Woodlands, Texas. And this is a very Republican area. It's not super duper MAGA-y. It's kind of like old school Republican, but they're still voting that way. But there was really good turnout here in the Woodlands, Texas for no kings. And that heartened me because, look, God's honest truth, Charlie, I've never had anybody confront me in public, even a MAGA person. It's crazy, right?
Really?
But it's I can't explain it. But I know when I'm out, at Ace Hardware or whatever, that there's people in there that recognize me that probably hate me, but don't want to come up and say anything. And so you get this feeling sometimes that you're surrounded, right? And in reality, there's a ton of people that feel just like you. I mean, the fact that, we have 350 million people in this country, and at any given time, probably 200 million are on your side is a huge deal. I mean, now, granted, a ton of them actually don't pay attention, but that's a huge deal, and it's important for us to remember at a time. What worries me, though, Charlie, and this is why your podcast and Substack in general is so important, is we are seeing this consolidation of information under the right-wing umbrella that is extremely frightening. The Larry Ellison now buying TikTok for about a tenth of what it's worth, which makes you wonder what deal China's getting out of it. Potentially my company, CNN, is up for sale. It is, this is where independent media, like what you're doing, is going to be really important.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think that this is a moment where independent media becomes more important than ever. This is not just self-pleading here. It's that, look, I mean, we have had a masterclass in what can go wrong with corporate media, what can go happen, the kinds of pressures. The good news is that the splintering of the media that of course has had so many dark consequences can also mean that there are homes for people like you and I to be able, without any bosses. There are no kings. There are no, and I am absolutely loving it. Okay, so in the few minutes we have left, so much for Donald Trump's pivot on Ukraine. All of that talk that he was going to back up Ukraine, that fell apart pretty quickly. Vladimir Putin played him once again, continues to play him. But then something kind of odd has happened. I wanted to get your take on all of this. They scheduled this. Trump was conned into having another summit, but this time in Budapest with their fellow wannabe autocrat Viktor Orban, who has cut Ukraine's tires at every possible occasion, and yet now it's called off because apparently the Russians are saying, "Yeah, we're not agreeing to this ceasefire deal with Donald Trump." So everybody's mad at everybody. So at least the Munich /3.0 is not going to take place. But give me your sense of where we're at on all of that. What Trump is going to do, whether Ukraine can survive this kind of vacillation.
Yeah, look, I think first off, it's probably the best thing that can happen for Ukraine is Donald Trump losing interest. I think that is the best thing because, what he's doing every time he backs away from his 2 weeks or doesn't do what he says, he's actually emboldening Putin to think he can win. He's emboldening the Russian troops who are absolutely getting just wasted on the battlefield. And so the best thing he can do is be like, I'm done, I'm out. I mean, actually, the real best thing would be to give tomahawks. I just don't think he's ever going to do it. Donald Trump, at the depth of himself, is a coward. He really is. And he admires Vladimir Putin, which is why it takes all of Europe and Zelensky multiple meetings to get Donald Trump to a certain point that literally Vladimir Putin could phone in and then get Donald Trump back to where he was, to where he's screaming at Zelensky, according to the Financial Times article.
What happened? Yeah.
He's screaming at him again. He can't win, even though 2 weeks ago, he's like, Ukraine can win. So look, here's the deal. Ukraine is actually pretty good defending itself now. All of their drones, they make themselves. They're actually the #1 drone producer, and they are going to end up being a very important part of European defense when this war is over. They're the largest standing army in Europe right now, 3rd largest, 4th largest in the world. And so they're making all their own drones. 50% of their actual munitions they're making on their own now. At the beginning of the war, that was 10% or something like that. We were able to wash through all the old Soviet crap in Eastern Europe through Ukraine. So now Eastern Europe is on NATO standard equipment, which was going to take 20 years. And Russia is basically at the cost of 1,000 men or 2,000 men able to take a square kilometer of a country that's like 300,000 square kilometers. And so Ukraine is going to win this war if we do not stand in the way. That's the big key. And we allow, and the other two big things are, if Donald Trump, to his credit, he's allowing this, continues to allow intel sharing with Ukraine, that's important, and continues to allow weapon sales by Europe. Now, here's an idea I have, Charlie.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
Which is $230 to $50 billion of Russian assets are frozen in Western and U.S. banks. The vast majority of this is in Europe, okay? And so far, they have allowed some of the interest off that money to go to Ukraine, so a little bit. But for 3 years, they've been talking about what to do with that money. My idea is this. If Donald Trump really wanted to end this war, he tells Vladimir Putin, I have $250 billion of yours. Every day, I'm going to release $2 billion of that. It'll be managed by a trust fund with the G7. That money will go to Ukraine to pay soldiers, to rebuild infrastructure, and to buy weapons. Every day, they get $2 billion until either that fund is exhausted in 120 days or until you declare a ceasefire. And when you declare a ceasefire, we quit spending that money. In theory, the rest is yours if we come to peace. But if you resume the war, $2 billion. So what is Vladimir Putin now having to take into account? Not just that he's losing 1,000 men a day, but he's now also building his enemy up by $2 billion a day of his own money. Those are the kinds of ways we have to think in the 21st century outside of the box to compel peace, I think.
Oh, I really like that. And the weird thing about it is you can sort of imagine how that might appeal to Trump's transactional mind, you know, to put it in those monetary terms. Of course, the question is getting Vladimir Putin to believe that Trump will follow through on this and not chicken out. But yeah, this has been a frustration, I think, for the last several years. You know, what are we going to do with those frozen Russian assets? At what point are we going to tap into them and make them pay a real tangible price for all that? I love that idea. And again, you have to have that push-pull, you know, increase the pain on Vladimir Putin beyond, obviously, the pain of losing thousands of men and having the kind of, you know, human desolation that he's had is not bothering him, is not enough. Maybe going after some of his resources might do that. A few more oligarchs lose their yachts, might actually get their attention. Who knows?
That's right. That's right.
Adam,
no, that's what you have to do.
All right. On that note, having come up with the solution that will win you the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
When it is adopted. Boy, by the way, wouldn't that be the ultimate troll?
Oh my God, I'd love it. Hey, if you're listening, I don't even want the Nobel Prize, but please nominate me so I get it, just so it pisses Trump off.
Yeah,
do it.
And we have lots of Norwegian readers and listeners, so pass that word along. Hey, and thank you all for watching this episode of To the Contrary podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We keep doing this, and it feels like this week, once again, in case you had forgotten, we are not the crazy ones. Thank you.